study session, August 26th. Presentation is IPL. Very important discussion. We're following up on what the PUAB had discussed earlier, and we're bringing that information to us. Mr. City Manager, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. As Councilmember Perkins alluded to, this past November, the council gave approval to 2 studies to review Independence Power and Light. One of those was focused on a cost-benefit analysis of the utility. The other one looking at a strategic plan if the city were to retain ownership of the utility. And then as part of the work, as the company got into it, was to look at the governance model structure around IPL as well. So a lot of conversation, a lot of presentation tonight. So I think without too much more ramp up, we'll go ahead and ask our consultants from the firm DKMT to come up and begin their presentation to council.
In the January timeframe, when you tasked us to come up with 2 independent studies, one being the cost-benefit analysis, another being a strategic plan, which also looked at governance. The purpose of the studies was one, to retain a cost-benefit and to do a cost-benefit analysis to identify what are the costs and what are the benefits of public ownership of Independence Power and Light. The second study, the strategic plan, was focused on should the decision be made to retain IPL, what actions could be taken to make it the best utility it can be. Neither report makes any definitive recommendations. We make observations. So the cost-benefit analysis does not recommend retaining or divesting of IPL. It merely presents the facts with regards to opportunities and ownerships. Because these were reports had to be done independently, for your desires, we hired a third-party consultant, Mr. Enrique Bacalao, who monitored our process throughout and gave us feedback to make sure there was no bias. He provided us a letter ascertaining that it had been done in an unbiased manner. We can provide a copy of that at your request. So what are the benefits of owning IPL? Well, for one thing, municipal utilities benefit from tax-free financing. So you get a cheaper source of funds to do the things you want to do. You have quicker decision-making. It may not seem like it, but you have quicker decision-making than your regulatory counterparts who can take years or more to get rate increases and decisions made on buying additional resources and things like that. You have the ability to provide additional services to the community. Some of your other municipalities that I'm sure you discuss things with, like the city of Springfield, provides public transportation, things like that. You provide fiber services to the city facilities and the school districts, and also support the other utilities of water and wastewater. And you set the fees. You folks set the fees and as to what each rate class will pay and how much they will pay to meet the revenue requirements of the utility. Currently employ 157 people with a payroll of $17 million. The effects on the community of losing a $17 million payroll is beyond the scope of these studies, and we didn't touch on that. Your utility provides industry-leading reliability. It's among the best in the nation with regard to the measures of SAIDI, SAIFI, KD, and all other ones, and it gets national recognition for that. And it should be said that they do this without automated meter reading. If they were given that, their responses could even be quicker. We talked about the shared services you provide. I'm sorry.
Microphone, please.
All right.
Is there a way to set it up on top of the podium so it will face you better?
How about if I put it up higher? Is that going to work?
And then give it a shot and see what you think.
All right. I will endeavor to stay closer to the microphone. And with your current ownership arrangement being a transmission owner, you have access to the wholesale electric markets. IPL currently generates about $5 million a year on average through the wholesale electric markets. You get a pilot fee off of that revenues. Should you pursue an alternative ownership strategy, we think you'd lose access to the wholesale. You would lose the ability to charge a pilot on wholesale market revenues. You would still have a pilot on retail electric revenues, but you would lose the ability in the wholesale market. So what are the costs of owning IPL? The industry is capital intensive, complex, and is changing rapidly as we speak. This does not just affect IPL, it affects your regulated neighbors, Evergy, it affects your municipal members. Things that are going on in the industry right now basically are there is a coming shortage of electrical generation capacity in sufficient quantities to meet the needs of the areas unless more generation is built. And that's becoming, we'll talk about it later, but the main factors are wind energy is produced very cheaply. There are no fuel costs in producing wind energy. So you get costs of 3 cents, 2 cents, 1 cent on a slow weekend for the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour. Thermal plants, coal plants, gas plants, oil plants cannot compete at those price levels. They are, in certain cases, depending on the technology used to construct the coal plants, they are not capable of cycling with the variations in wind energy. And so they lay dormant. So these plants run less and less. We'll talk about it when we look at your debt, but that's one of the reasons your investments in coal plants, the plants could terminate operations sooner than the end of plant life. These were not bad investments in the 2000s and the 2016s when it was assumed these plants would run as a base load, constant, 80%, 100% of the time. They would pay their debt, they would generate funds, they would meet your needs. The market has changed, that is no longer the case. Through 2049, which is the end of your obligations that we analyzed, the net present value of the revenue that IPL will generate is about $2.4 billion. That matches the obligations that you have through 2049, which is $2.4 billion. So what does that say? Well, on the city council, this city council and other city councils have done a good job because your city charter mandates that you run at break even. So you're not generating capital excesses, you're not generating long-term debt. There's a modest $6 million over this period through 2049 that would be generated, which is less than 0.2% of the total obligations. So it's de minimis. What could change the status quo that you're operating at? One, just the general rate of inflation, the rate of inflation within the electric utility industry. The need for capacity. Why would you need additional capacity in Independence? Perhaps you want additional capacity to support economic growth. Perhaps you want additional capacity as a hedge should your investments in Iatan 2 and Nebraska City 2 coal plants would shut down early. And third, perhaps in SPP right now, the rules are changing for capacity adequacy requirements. They're going from 15% to 16% in the summer in 2026. And for the first time, they're adding a new requirement for a 33% resource adequacy requirement in the winter. Independence is fortunate in that the shape of its load curve is summer peaking. So your capacity needs are set by your summer peak. In the wintertime, you have more than enough excess capacity as of right now. Your neighbors who have different load profiles, who might have a more steady load profile based on industrial load, larger commercial loads, will find themselves looking for additional winter capacity in the marketplace, and that will also help drive up the price of capacity over time. Compensation levels, there is a national shortage of electrical line workers in the country right now. This is not just a IPL problem, it's nationwide. And so compensation rates are going up. It is common in municipal governments to compare the salaries in the electric utility with the salaries of other municipal workers. They are different beasts requiring different skill sets. For example, a lineman will go through a 4 or 5 year apprentice program based on the local state requirements. The throughput of the apprentice program is usually controlled by the state, so you just can't hire 200, 300 people and say, we're going to run them through and make them linemen in 4 years. There are certain requirements as to the number of people who can be in the program at once. Supply chain issues in the electric industry. In the pandemic, these were a bigger concern. They are now. They're slowly working themselves out. But the need for a more robust grid, the need for replacing aging infrastructure affects the supply chain and drives prices up. Currently, there's, these are your 2024 numbers. There's $264 million in outstanding debt on principal bonds that are tied to the assets or the revenue stream from the electric utility. Those bonds are held by Omaha Public Power District, $64 million on Nebraska City 2. The Missouri Electric Commission, your share is $86.5 million for Iatan 2. And the Missouri Development Finance Board, $116 million. This money is based on your refinancing of the Dogwood plant and also electrical infrastructure in the city. All the bond covenants state that should the City of Independence decide to change the revenue structure or the way that the utility is governed, you would need the permission of these three bondholders. So that means if you want to sell it, and they're not, and that also goes on to say that they cannot unreasonably withhold permission to do that. But you need the permission of these three bondholders prior to contemplating alternative ownership for IPL. And their biggest concern is endangering the bond's tax-free status. So they will not enter into any arrangement that impairs the tax-free status for the remaining bondholders. The obligations for Nebraska City 2, Iatan 2, and Dogwood remain even if the plants are being shut down or terminated early. So basically, Independence Power and Light in the City of Independence finds itself in the situation that you're building two coal plants, you're paying for the construction of Nebraska City 2, and you're paying for the construction of Iatan 2 right now. As I said before, these weren't bad contracts when you first entered them in the 2000 timeframe, 2006, but the industry has changed and they are running less and less. So what does that mean? That means that the difference has to be made up by the ratepayers to basically to pay the mortgage on the plants. So,
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please proceed.
Is it okay, as we kind of walk through, there's a lot of information, maybe have some questions? Sure. Take them as we go. Can you walk through, on a squirrel moment, can you walk through what it would look like to notify Missouri Electric Commission and the Missouri Development Finance Board? What would we have to do to notify them and let them know if we were wanting to divest from?
well, I think the process would go something like you would have to make your intentions known that you're going to pursue alternative ownership scenarios with these bondholders and ask them what their requirements are. I mean, you would not have and then you would start to go through the RFP process. You would issue an RFP, you'd establish a data room, you'd invite potential bidders. Once you got offers, you'd have to look at the tax characteristics of the offerer and take that to these bondholders and ask them, does this impact the tax-free status of these bonds? And what arrangement could you live under to do this? Besides the principal payments on this, the contracts also require IPL and the City of Independence to pay all the operating costs through the end of life, so fuel and things like that. So I think that's how the process would initially start.
My second question, with the obligation of NC2 and Iatan 2 and Dogwood,
did you do an analysis of what that would look like if we were to extract ourselves from or terminate those contracts, what the fees, penalties, whatnots would be for those?
We did for Nebraska City 2 and for Iatan 2 because we figure those are the most likely candidates that would terminate early. For Nebraska City 2, you're in the fortunate position that you pay more in O&M than you do in principal and interest on the debt based on the last 5 years' averages. So you would come out ahead, but then you would have to go into the market and buy another 50 megawatts of capacity somewhere to meet your resource adequacy requirements. Of what the price of that might be, we don't know. Your preliminary discussions with Oneta indicate that the prices of capacity have, I believe, almost doubled in the marketplace since you initially entered that contract. With Iatan 2, it's not as beneficial a story. You pay more in interest and principal on the debt for Iatan 2 than you do in O&M. So the O&M, and I should also say, in Nebraska City 2, decommissioning costs are included. With Iatan 2, you pay more in principal and interest on the debt than the O&M costs. So should the plant shut down early, there's still about $1 million a year in principal and interest being paid. You also have to go out and find another 53 megawatts, I believe it is, in the marketplace to replace that capacity to meet your resource adequacy requirements. And currently, Iatan 2 decommissioning costs are not included in your payments. There is a debt reserve fund, a sinking fund, that perhaps would cover those costs, but that is unknown at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
So you talk about the MEC would have to sign off, the finance board would have to sign off. If this was sold to a for-profit entity, would the PSC also have to agree to the sale?
Yes, if you were going to sell to Evergy or a regulated utility, the Missouri Public Utility Commission would sign off to see that, one, that other ratepayers are not being impacted by the acquisition of IPL. And you'd have to go to all these bondholders and find out what the intentions were of that potential buyer to pay off this debt. We don't know that it's clear that they could assume the debt, but then also have to pay off the O&M costs that the city of Independence has agreed to do through the life of the plant. The Iatan 2 and the Nebraska City 2 are the highest probabilities and we think the biggest risk to the city of Independence right now, because in 2030, 2032, there are new emission requirements going in for coal plants that will require either significant capital investment to reduce emissions by the 80 or 90% that is required by the laws, or it'd be be terminated early. Either way, if they made the investment in environmental controls, that would be a huge capital investment. They would take you along with it. And if they shut the plant down early, you would continue to pay on the debt.
May I ask, you said one of these, I think Nebraska City does not cover decommissioning costs. That's not part of our original payment. What does-
Nebraska City 2 is covering its
Okay,
decommissioning
so
too.
in Iatan-
Iatan 2 has not yet.
What is the scope of that cost? Because that's a cost that we don't carry on our books, and I'm just curious what additional sort of
Yeah,
surprise that could be.
I think it is unknown at this time with regarding to the scope of the cost or what the environmental regulations at the site would require. But as a point of reference, your Blue Valley site, the estimated environmental decommissioning costs are $25 to $50 million. And that's a much smaller site. But you don't also have any partners in that.
Thank you.
As we mentioned before, the city's obligated to pay its portion of fuel, O&M, and decommissioning costs for these plants. The obligation of that is estimated, the net present value of that is estimated $433 million through 2049. You have capacity contracts with Oneta, which you can extend and increase the amount of capacity, and you have purchase power contracts for wind with Smoky Hills, Marshall Wind, and the solar farm. These are fungible, meaning you could probably sell these contracts, but currently we think they're out of the market. The estimated liability, clean up Blue Valley, depending on the environmental regulations, is 25 to 50 million. This is based on your experience at Missouri City. There's an estimated liability for healthcare at 38 million, and an estimated liability for employees in the loggers program of 7 million. We also estimate that $5 million that is currently covered through IPL rates would be transferred to other city departments to maintain the same level of service in the city that IPL is providing. For example, for the fiber backhaul, its contributions to finance and administration and things like that.
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
Don, current IPL obligations, the estimated environmental liability to clean up the Blue Valley site, 25, 50 million. Is that for a full decommission and remediation of that property, bringing that building to the ground,
Yes.
25 to 50 million?
And then it's 25 million is on the low side, depending on what set of environmental regulations you have to comply with.
Sure.
I mean, if you have to dig up your ash pits, that drives you to the $50 million.
We already spent 6 million on that.
Yeah.
So that's taking that building completely down.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just comparing to what we did some years ago. That was significantly cheaper than that. Thank you.
Okay, IPL is an efficient utility. It compares well with its peers, with the exception of generation costs. And we'll talk a little bit more about what drives those generation costs and why that might be. Because when we went into this engagement, we had the assumption that IPL was high. The question was, why? Why was the cost of power so high for, you have a very lean staff, you have good reliability. So we went looking for answers. And here you can see that IPL is the bar on the left in all these charts. For generation, IPL is more expensive than, this is Springfield, Evergy, West, Missouri, and Liberty Utilities. And you see that the generation cost is higher than them. But transmission, distribution, customer service, and administration and general costs is lower or in the ballpark with these companies. So the inefficiency is not sitting there in running the distribution system, it's not running the transmission system, it's not sharing costs to service customers. The inefficiency, if you'll have it, is in the generation side. So why would that be? Well, when you look at SPP, when you run a generating plant, when they call on you to run that plant, they pay for your coal, they pay for your fuel, they pay for your variable O&M, so you are made whole on those costs. You experienced that in Winter Storm Uri when you made $12 million in generation credits that were offset against the exorbitantly high electric prices at that time. So those provided some cushion to the ratepayers in IPL. You experienced at the beginning of this year when you made about $400,000 when there was a cold snap in January. So you're paid and you're made whole when they call on you to run. And the market design in the Southwest Power Pool is that the most efficient generators get called first to provide the lowest cost of power to the members of SPP. So your CTs were called upon because they were the most efficient units at the time, and capacity was very scarce. We've seen a trend over time as coal plants shut down in SPP, your CTs are called upon more and more. But whenever they run, they're made whole. So your fixed O&M costs on your CTs is like $500,000 a year. So when they don't run, you're stuck with the fixed costs. The fixed cost being the mortgage, the fixed cost being the debt service, the principal and interest, and any fixed O&M to run the site. And that is the reason why your generation costs are higher than its peers, because of the debt associated with Iatan 2. It's over 50% of what you pay, and Nebraska City 2. It's about 28% of what you pay there. So that feeds into the overall cost. When you do a high-level comparison, you just take total, using FERC accounting, you take high-level sales revenue divided by the number of kilowatts delivered, and you see IPL is higher than this peer group. And the majority of that, we think, is the way debt is structured. So an approximate breakdown of IPL, what are the cost drivers? If you're looking for the levers to lower the cost of power, you see that the blue up there is the total purchase power cost minus the debt. We took the principal and interest and we put those in the other categories of principal and interest. So distribution O&M is your next highest cost. No surprise, you're a distribution utility. Pilot costs, the costs for the pilot fee, and then you come to your interest on bonds, and you come to your capital investment. You put in about $6 million a year on average into the system, and the system is in great health. When we sent an engineering firm out to look at the system, we were surprised in what good shape the system is in, and that's one of the reasons why you have such great reliability. And then you look at the total principal on bonds. This test year is 2024. It may credit you with more principal payment than you typically get for that year. And then you have transmission O&M, and on down the line through CT O&M and your payroll taxes. So if you look for the levers, I think your total interest on your bonds is one area that could be investigated with your financial advisors to look at, say, what could we do? Is it possible to prepay debt? Could we get out from under some of these risks we are facing, while at the same time perhaps borrowing more money to put in AMI, look at additional generation capacity, or things like that. For example, your 2016 D bonds, at that point in time, basically those are a lease on your assets. And some of those assets have since been shut down and disappeared. But you're paying nothing but interest. You pay $1.7 million in interest through 2038 before you start paying balloon principal payments. If there was a way to more aggressively pay off that principal, eventually you will lower overall rates and IPL will become lower cost than its neighbors. So any additional questions?
Please proceed.
A couple of questions. So I did read your report and had the benefit that others may not have had of listening to you at the PUAB meeting as well. But you talk in there a bit about state tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Department of Energy are available. Can you speak a little more to that and what that might, possibilities there might be?
Sure. Both the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill give significant tax credits to green energy and reducing carbon emissions types projects. So batteries, I think Smart Grid would potentially qualify for one of those programs. More renewable energy efficiency in lower income communities, things like that. There are a plethora of programs tailored to address those issues. There's also the DOE Loan Program Office that has numerous classifications of loans, ranging from nuclear power, coal gasification to manufacturing and things like that, that you can tap and get government guaranteed loans to support your projects. So, for example, if in your Eastgate development you are getting a client who is going to create things that are good for energy infrastructure cleaner energy infrastructure, they, perhaps in conjunction with the city, could apply for an LPO loan and get government guaranteed funding.
Okay, all right, that's helpful, thank you. In our original RFP, we asked for evaluation of IPL, and you've discussed that, in some ways. You came in like, in the report, it talked about a net present value of about $6.some million.
$600 million is what we valued the system at. And that includes your generation plants, your power purchase agreements, the infrastructure itself for the distribution center was more on the order of $500 million. But we caution that that is not a sales price. That is one method of valuing the system. So that would,
Because then you have to take in all the debt that we have and
well,
everything.
the debt is separate from that. So if somebody offered you $600 million, there's $260 million in outstanding bonds. Let's say there's $25 million. There's $300 million in environmental, and then you roll in the other liabilities. You're at $350 million. And would somebody, I do not know, would somebody buy a 50,000 customer electric distribution company for that? I don't think so, but the market would tell you.
Anyone else?
And the process for doing that, in our experience, is 1 to 2 years at best, perhaps longer, given complications that can arise.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to understand that valuation question.
Can I jump in on
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
Councilman
Sure.
Fears? So just to recap what you were saying, 600 million minus some of the debts and the whatnots, we're probably will net 300 million, 350 million?
I mean, that's the way the math will work, but I think an offer of, it would be just conjecture on my part. Right?
Sure,
Right.
understood. In the scope, did you drill down any more specifically regarding what the total asset value would be?
I mean, we did the value of the distribution system is $500 million.
Okay,
T&D.
okay. Any part?
That's using a methodology called replacement cost new less depreciation. So we went in, we inventoried the system, we say, what would it cost to build that today?
Yeah.
Then based on the age of the components, we back out depreciation based on a 40-year or 20-year life, depending on the asset. That's one method of valuation. The income approach of evaluation would be a little bit more problematic in that you run it as break even. So where's, if it was one IOU taking over another IOU, they'd look at the income stream, they put a value on it, and they'd buy it. You don't have an income stream to value. So that would be a little bit more problematic.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I hadn't figured that into my thinking, but you're absolutely right on that. It would be hard to sell that on the market, not having that bottom line income
Yeah.
profitability, especially if you're looking at
Right.
boards and.
I mean, if somebody came and offered you $600 million and paid off the debt, and their rate of return was 10%, they would eventually turn to the city and look for $60 million a year to start getting their money back.
Yeah.
And right now, you're running a break even.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone else, other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
thank you. So for full disclosure, I had voted against both of these studies because I didn't really feel they were needed.
Can Can you
And
speak up just a
Oh,
little
I'm sorry,
bit?
I voted against both these studies, I didn't really feel they were needed. But I do concede that the information you provided was pretty good, and maybe it was needed. So I am still under the opinion that there's no reason to even consider selling this utility. I don't know how the rest of my council members feel about that. But I had asked the city manager to put a resolution on to rescind any items that stated that we would ever go for a vote on this. And specifically the resolution that said we had called one for in April of 2025. And I would hope that the rest of the city council would support that at this time. So, and that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, other questions, comments, concerns?
We have two more presentations to go.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
I'll now introduce my colleague, Heather Bailey, who ran the strategic planning session and talked to many people within the community.
Make sure you can hear me. Can you all hear me okay? Perfect. I'm Heather Bailey. I am partnered with Don on this work for independence. I just want to say it's been a real pleasure to work with everybody. The community's been great. The utility's been great. The city, everybody has been very helpful. We collected a lot of information. And I'm going to start with the governance report, because one of the things that we heard from everybody, that was probably the predominant theme of what the city can do from a strategic perspective, is address the governance issue. I'm going to start with a quote, because I think this is really fundamental to governance. Board governance could be a public power's greatest strength or its weakest link. And I will tell you, I've seen both. And so this is the premise in which we did our work. There are two governance models in essence out there. One is the city council based, and the other is an independent board. A subset of the city council is an advisory board, which is really what IPL has today. The difference is the council model is everything comes to the city council, from purchases, rate decisions, budget. Council is responsible for everything. And that's important because that requires a lot of attention. The advisory board helps lighten that load a little bit, and that the cities that have the advisory boards, as you all know, they ask those boards to review a lot of the information that would come to the city council and make recommendations. That way, council wouldn't spend as much time evaluating the materials, looking at the issues, and having to understand the details of how the utilities run. An independent board model is where an independent board that's typically appointed by the council or some other governing body and operates independently of council and overseeing the operations of the utility. Most of the decisions are made at that independent board level. The majority of the decisions that boards deal with are things like policy, rates, budgets, strategic planning, hiring, firing, the general manager, et cetera. Most of those situations, though, final decisions on rates typically come to council. So not everything has a final decision, but council has different levels of authority on rates, you'll find, depending on the community. I think an interesting statistic is that 70% of the public power utilities, the size of Independence Power and Light or bigger, have independent boards. And there's a reason for that, the complexity and the amount of time it takes. The 30% that don't have an independent board require their city manager to have some utility background. So in the case of independence, where 40% of your revenues come from the utility and 38% of the expenses, it's a pretty significant piece of your business. So the pros and cons of each model. The pro of the city council, especially in smaller communities, is that ultimately council's accountable, and they are closer to aligning the values of the utility and their operations with the community. And most small communities, if they have a utility, it's strictly T&D. They don't typically own generation. So the complexity is not what you have here. The cons, and trust me, this is not a dig at council or anybody, but you as council know better than anyone else how much you have to deal with. And I always like I remember someone giving me the analogy when they were on council. I've got to deal with the dog catcher on the same level I deal with the utility. I have so many priorities and issues that I'm looking at. I can't devote the time proportionally to the utility. And that's the biggest con, because if you as council are dealing with police, fire, health, human services, dog catcher, whatever the issue of the moment is, it's hard to be nimble and quick in the decision-making on issues affecting the utility, much less know how the utility business needs to be run and the intricacies of the utility industry and what's changing. Therefore, decision-making is a little bit slower sometimes. You will tend to be more risk-averse because of what you're worried about what you don't know. So you're not going to make a decision on something you don't know. So there are a lot of things that come into play because of the strain on your resources. Board oversight. An independent board, their sole job is overseeing the utility, and so that is their singular focus. They will spend all of their time and energy understanding how the utility operates, what's happening in the industry, and that is their focus. Typically, they are the body that hires and fires the general manager. They monitor the utility's operations. There's performance metrics. They keep on top of the finances of the utility, and they tend to have more time to engage with the public. The public independent boards that I deal with have a huge focus on community engagement and require the utility to spend a lot of time doing outreach and getting input on things like strategic plans, rates, whatever the big issues are, resource plans. One of the things that's important, because they are getting input and trying to align with the community's priorities, is they tend to be closer to the community, but they also set performance metrics that reflect the values of that community, and they monitor that performance. They can be more nimble in their decision-making depending on the processes. And it allows for the council to ultimately have a level of accountability on things like rates, sometimes the budget, condemnation, and issuing debt. Those are the only 4 categories that independent boards typically have referred decision-making upward. And it's different in every community depending on their charter and ordinances, that sort of thing. So examples of the different models. Seattle City Light is an example of a council oversight board, and it's a very large utility. The mayor hires, fires, and evaluates basically the general manager. So the general manager of the utility reports directly to the mayor. The council is, in essence, the board of directors, but they've also put in some mechanisms to help alleviate some of their load. They have an automatic rate increase mechanism so that they aren't dealing every year with rate increases and all the stuff that goes around that. Now, if something outside of an adjustment for CPI occurs, they'll have to go do a much more in-depth process. They also bring in community citizens boards to help review any strategic plans. But besides that, the council's pretty heavily involved. Long Island Power Authority, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. Their board is appointed by the governor, and they make all the decisions, regardless of what they are, for this utility. It's a very large utility up in New York. The representatives represent districts within the service area, and they make everything, decisions on rates, budgets, etc. So nothing goes beyond this board. And they hire and fire the general manager. CPS Energy of San Antonio is an independent board, and it's comprised of board members that represent the districts that are served, and the mayor serves as an ex officio member of that board. They make all the decisions, set the policy, set the direction, monitor the performance, hold the utility accountable. They do have to take the budget and condemnation, debt issuance if it impacts the credit of the city, and any rate adjustments to the council on an advisory basis. The council does not typically get involved. They really delegate the authority to the board. One thing I want to mention about CPS Energy, it is probably best in class when it comes to public power. And they have made great strategic decisions. They are very forward-thinking. They have some of the lowest rates in the country, in the state of Texas, certainly. And they pay one of the highest pilots I've seen. But I think, and this is my opinion, I've watched them for many decades, is the independent board, because they are so engaged with the utility, they force the utility to engage with the community, and they have a set of values that are very important and priorities. They are comfortable making the hard decisions and taking the risk because they do it with full knowledge. And so you'll see CPS Energy do some progressive things you don't see necessarily other utilities do. And they're willing to pilot things before they try them too. So it's a good example of what works. Not to say that they're perfect, but they have a lot of things right. City Utilities of Springfield, which all of y'all are familiar with, is another very good utility. It's an independent board that oversees all of their utilities. It's got 11 members. What's interesting about this and CPS is that the terms of the board members do not necessarily coincide with the city councils. Even though they're appointed by council, their terms may be longer, and typically they have the ability to have two terms total. They are responsible for setting policy, direction, making all the decisions. They are very focused on the utility and very knowledgeable. They need, I guess the requirements here are that they have to take the budget and any rate increases to council. What's interesting, they can take the budget, but the council is not allowed to change it. So it's kind of a perfunctory approval. And the rates, they can only propose alterations to the rates and send it back. So it's a very structured process, and it's laid out in their charter. So it's very interesting, but it seems to work. They've got a very successful utility. I mean, y'all are familiar with how they operate. So the roles of board members in an independent board are really pretty straightforward. They're trustees. They have a legal and a fiduciary responsibility, which is a little bit different from an advisory board. They're the regulator. They are the representative of the community, and they're an advocate for public power. I know over the years when I've been in public power, I will see board members at APPA conferences involved in all sorts of things to level up their knowledge and make sure they're keeping in touch with what's happening. In line with that, their responsibility is really to make sure the utility is fiscally sound and make sure they issue regular financial reports on their performance, make sure service is highly reliable, that the goals, plans, and programs reflect the priorities of the community, and that charges are fair and competitive and transparent. In addition, on a regular basis, they set the strategic goals and monitor them. I've mentioned that before. They're responsible for the general manager of the utility. And what they also do is they monitor their own performance. A best practice of these boards is that annually they sit down and do a critique. Have we performed in the best way that we can, and what can we do different? So IPL, some of our observations, and this isn't a negative towards anybody, this is just what it is. The turnover of city council membership has led to a lack of continuity in the issues facing IPL. And I think as a result, it's been harder to make certain decisions that have impacted both the community and the utility. As I mentioned before, you as a council have a lot of responsibility for oversight of all city operations. And so that limits your ability to devote time to some of the issues affecting IPL. The council in the past has lacked ownership of the strategic direction of IPL, and I think that was mentioned in our prior report that we did a few years ago. And there is no formal process in the approval of rates for tying the revenue requirement, what we call the cost of service, to what the rates look like. And y'all are familiar. Some of the decisions on rates have been purely political, and that doesn't help anybody. The other issue that we run into is that the financial records are not necessarily opaque. They're at the city level. Doesn't mean the city's doing a bad job. There just aren't the resources to do the level of work to support an understanding by the managers at IPL of what it costs, how they're doing against the budget, and what actions they need to take to manage that. You can't manage things if you don't know your budget and you don't know what it's costing you. But that's a function of not having enough resources. I think people have been cut, costs have been cut, perhaps to the detriment of operations. Under current governance, y'all know this better than I do, there is a constant debate on what economic development the utility can do. And it's how individuals interpret the charter. I will say economic development is the golden egg for cities when you own your own utility, because there is so much influence electric rates and infrastructure have on attracting new business. If you control the rates, you control the infrastructure, you control the relationship, and you control the reliability. That is a huge benefit, economic benefit. So looking at how IPL can benefit the city is something that, and get in alignment, one way or the other.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Heather, can you expand just a little bit about economic development and what that looks like in your world of travels there?
In my world, it looks like a lot of different things.
Sure.
But what you have to step back and say, why would businesses come to your community? And typically when communities are trying to recruit new industry, you've got the chamber, you've got the city, and you've got the utility coming together to put together packages of things that would attract the business, depending on what it is. And utilities can come forward with things like incentive rates, rebates on certain investments, infrastructure to an area that may not have adequate infrastructure. Reliability is huge, as you all know. Every industry relies on power and technology, and having that. Have key account programs, and I'll talk about in the strategic plan. Having a personal relationship with your business community so that you have a liaison that listens to that business community. Those are a lot of the different things, and there's more. I mean, I have clients that have had areas of land that they own, the utility did, and decided maybe they weren't going to develop it, and so they did a swap or a negotiation with the city, and it became a development. So there's just different things out there, and I really would talk to your peers because that changes over time, but I just know that everybody uses their utility to attract industry.
To follow that up, it may be more in your slide here, but listening to the PUAB, you were discussing that a little bit and what that kind of looks like in different communities and how that works with, if we're at an appropriate level because we're a charter-based city, then we have to follow the charter, and there's those two different camps, right? Do we use economic development as a business-like manner, or do we not? I mean, there's that interpretation. I'm in the camp that when appropriate, we should use that, our enterprise funds for economic development when appropriate. The case in point for me is when we built our Uptown Market, we used enterprise funds for that. And if we would have listened to the noise at that moment, we wouldn't have built that, and it wouldn't be the success that it is now, and the community involvement that it is now. And also, we just came through an election where we were going to amend our charter, and a couple of the charter amendments, I think it was amendment number 3,
if passed, would have certainly limited how the council could perceive economic development through our enterprise funds. It would have prohibited us from doing any type of economic development like that. And the citizens, in their wisdom, and rightly so, turned that down. So they have put full faith in us as a council to be able to use, when appropriate, a business-like manner, our enterprise funds for development. So it's just something that we have to wrestle with too. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I will tell you, everybody we interviewed said they would like to see IPL used as an economic development tool. So I think that jives with what you were saying, that you're hearing from the voters.
Sure.
We've definitely heard it from the people we interviewed. Lastly, the administrative requirements for taking something to council to get a decision can be a little bit onerous and time-consuming. The lead time to get a piece of information approved may be longer than the time frame available to make that decision. And that's where looking at that process and either making it more efficient or delegation of authority or potentially a different governance structure would help. I'm not going to go through all these. They speak for themselves, but the 10 tips for governance excellence. I mean, the big one is roles are clearly defined, people are empowered, CEO is responsible for the day-to-day, the board sets the policy, and they hold each other accountable. I mean, that's really the way it works. And this is just the mechanics of making sure that all happens properly. So I'm going to close with this quote. For a successful board management relationship, trust has to be at the top of the list. There also must be open sharing of information back and forth, and there must be a clear delineation of the board's and management's respective responsibilities. And with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
Thank you for this. I'm really intrigued by this governance discussion, and it's something we're going to have to, I think, have, in the months and ahead. But a couple of things that I wanted to specifically question. So you speak real highly of San Antonio. You didn't say how many board members they had and how long their terms were. Can you speak to that?
They have 5. 4 from the districts they represent, and 1 is the mayor. They serve 5-year terms, maximum 10 years.
Okay, that's helpful. And on these independent boards, are the directors paid for their work?
Typically, it is like a de minimis amount, almost like a per diem. It's not like a corporate board.
Okay. All right, I was just kind of curious about how that worked. Like I say, I'm really intrigued by this. I think we need to have some discussion as a council on this, and lots of ramifications to some of the pieces of it, but certainly we are looking for ways to streamline, operations and decisions and things of that nature, and so I appreciate this.
Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
Heather, interested in when you have a board like this, I would imagine that there are baseline skills that are required to sit on that board, either financial skills or financing skills, budgeting skills, utility skills.
Most boards like that do have some base level requirements. Either you're a representative of the business community, you represent some aspect of the customer base, like low-income residents. You may have a utility background or a financial background. A lot of them have some pretty base requirements. And even when they don't state them outright, when they go through the appointment process, you see that. And that is something that's become more and more prevalent in the way board members are appointed.
And it would be, I will leave it to the city manager to ask you for sample language. I am a huge fan of plagiarism. I think that borrowing excellent ideas from other communities would enhance our work considerably. So appreciate if you can provide us
Sure.
with some of that enabling legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Other further questions?
And I should say, in full disclosure, CPS Energy is our client. So we know them really well and deal with the good and bad. So I think we've given a pretty solid representation.
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
So I also think it's important to have a mix of skill sets on these boards. But if it's an appointment process, I mean, there's an application process as well, right? I mean, you're basically interviewing for a job. So can you talk about their process a little bit?
There's different processes. Some of them require you to fill an application. And most boards, quite honestly, you have to fill an application. And then you have a nominations committee or a group of people that vet you to make sure you've got the skills and bring to the table what they're looking for. And then it's taken to the council to approve. The case of CPS Energy, they've evolved, but they've got a pretty business-oriented board. And when someone is going to be rolling off, the board also helps identify people in the community that have the skills that they're looking for and helping to recruit members. But ultimately, the council decides.
Yes. Anyone else? Other questions? Anybody else? Other questions? I've got a couple for you, but I've also got a kind of a follow-up, and indulge me on that. So obviously, our rates are a tad higher than our competitors for what the consumer pays. But also, you probably saw the survey results that citizens had with regards to how much they love their utility. And so with your history, seeing a similar kind of question, was that high, low, their love of their utility, things like that? I mean, people here really, really like IPL.
Most communities, the utilities are beloved because of the connection that they have with the people. Either their neighbor works for the utility, or something's happened, the utility has come to their aid, or just the relationship and the types of services and the ability to have input. So, it's hard to say. I have worked with good and bad, and I'll tell you, the survey, whether you get a good rating or not, depends on what's going on. If you would have surveyed customers in Texas that were public power customers after or when Uri was going on, it would have been a very different story. However, the investor-owned utilities would have had the same thing. It really, a lot of it's timing, but I think it's pretty natural for communities. What I gathered from reading that is people thought the reliability was great. And quite honestly, all the average person cares about is when they go into a room and turn that switch on, or they turn their computer on, it works. And that's a gift, I will say, because not everybody has that. That is probably one of the biggest strengths of this utility, is their reliability, how they keep up their infrastructure and the people that do the work.
And that was, you read my mind there, because I was going to actually talk about the 99.86%, I believe, that was the average on it. And you used two models to do that. I guess is it called Katie and Safety?
Sadie, it's Katie, Kafi, Sadie, and Safety, depending on what part of the system. Sadie, I think, is typically the system level, and Katie is at the customer level reliability.
Okay, but for IPL,
It's good.
it was excellent, and
Yeah.
for Joe and your staff, well done, excellent work, great job, and I trust me, I'm like probably all the other council members on here. We love when we flip on the light, it works, and it always does. And so, thank you for the outstanding job that you do there. I've also wanted to do this, and this may be out of bounds, and if it is, tell me. I've got like another 30 questions. I don't want to have this council to indulge on that. Is it possible for myself and maybe other council members who have an interest in that to reach out to you and meet with you and to ask those questions, obviously with the city manager's approval and with, Joe's approval, I don't know if that's appropriate, and, Mr. City Manager, I don't want to go out of bounds here, but is that fair? Because I just don't want to take all that time with the questions that I've come up with to do that.
With your colleagues' indulgence, I think that would be perfectly fine.
And I invite anybody to who would like to participate in that, just maybe we don't expect you to be here. I don't think you live in the Independence area, so if we could do a Zoom meeting to make it easy and convenient for you, that'd be my preference. That way you don't have to worry, I don't want you to travel again. I want you to also be very convenient for you and, not take time out. But, easily I would take an hour to 90 minutes to go through these and get a real understanding of that. And I don't want to take everybody's time here this evening to do that, but I just think it's really important, at least for me, for my justification to understand that.
Of course. Obviously, I'm from Texas, in case y'all haven't noticed, but it's only an hour and a half flight, so I can do whatever's easiest for y'all.
Yeah, I would rather just do a Zoom. That
That's
way you
perfect.
hop on a flight and
Yeah.
make your life easier, and
Yeah.
whenever you can schedule it. So how's the best way for us to go through that process? Just go through the city manager's office, go through Joe's office?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else, other follow-up questions? Please proceed.
So when you talked about governance, I'm just curious, in those governance models, are they responsible in part for the public education portion, or is that, because we talk very much about this being transactional, and we forget that the end user is a huge influence on how much they use, what time they use, et cetera. And we've not done a great job of inviting people into that equation, so just curious how they use that.
Well, your governance body is the one entity that has the time to do that, if it's either an advisory board or an independent board. It plays a huge part of how things are done, and especially today, you can't, unless you're an IOU, you don't see utilities taking the traditional paternalistic view as, I will make the decisions and it will be good for you. You really have the community engaged. And so it's the governance body that drives that value and expectation of how the utility does that. And it has to be done in two ways. One, the governance can help lead it or say, hey, I'd like to see the utility engage a consultant or whoever to go out and get public input on this issue. Or also, you see utilities a lot more proactive. Most utilities that are of any size have their own corporate communications person because the industry and the business is complicated, and the decisions you want people to make are complicated. Having someone who can speak plain English and not engineering ease, not any dig towards the utility folks, but that is a problem, is the communication. So having someone that can translate issues in plain English and ask the questions. And the strategic plan, we talk about it even more, but having a communications team is critical. You want your public to know all about you.
Thank you.
That it? Okay. I'm going to move on to the strategic plan. And first of all, I know it was a big document, and I apologize. There was just a lot of stuff. How many of y'all, and this is not a pass-fail thing, but it will drive how much I talk about it. How many of y'all had a chance to read the plan? Oh, wow. And has everybody had a chance to see the PowerPoint? All right, this is normally, I will just say, a 45-minute discussion, and I know that y'all are tired. I will just focus on the high points, and you can ask me all the questions you want. Normally, I don't need to do the introduction, that's been done. I do want to talk about the approach we took. What were some of the vision statements that came out of that, driven by the folks we interviewed? The highest priority strategies that came out of our meetings were the financial, customer, power supply, and operations. And then the financial forecast is how we incorporated those strategies into the financial model to see what kind of impact it would have on rates going forward. We did a lot of gathering of information. We held a strategic planning session with the staff of IPL, which was great. They were very forthcoming and honest about their strengths and weaknesses and what they would like to see. We met with city management leadership, PUAB members, and some of them I think are in the room. We met with some of the city council members, and we met with various representatives from the community, from people representing low income, to the chamber, to the school district, to businesses, your largest customers. I think we got a pretty good sampling, and community activists. So the input we received, I believe, is really, really valuable and gave some good direction. We also used our expertise in industry data as well as IPL data to do our analysis. What we heard, and I'm going to just kind of hit on some high points. Governance, data-driven decision-making, business-like decision-making, operate like a business, transparency, economic development, future of generation decisions. Something that I think is very important and probably not talked about enough is having IPL be a place where employees want to work and to be their best. That's really important for any organization. But for folks that are working under the conditions that are dangerous and bad hours, but you want them to do a good job and be reliable, that's important. Yes.
Quick question. You've mentioned data-driven and then transparency. It's probably with regards to financial information. What's your perspective on that? And just a real quick, like, best practice or...
Best practice is that there's a monthly or quarterly financial statement or cash flow or position of the performance of the utility, how it's performing against budget, and performing against the rates.
And that's what you mean also by transparency at that point?
And it's good data. One of the things we heard from folks, whether it's true or not, is a lot of folks didn't trust the information they were getting, or that they couldn't get good data, or inconsistent. And I will be honest, it was hard sometimes to get information, but it's not because people are bad or anything. It's because there wasn't enough staff to pull the numbers. There's no one at IPL that can pull financial statement information. And with the turnover at the city, it became even more difficult. There's maybe 2 people that knew how to find what we needed. So it is a function of resources. Again, the best-in-class reliability. Folks love that about IPL, so don't lose it. Communication, to your point, they want more. They want to be educated. We've talked about rates, talked about programs, and this is something I can talk about a little bit more, but you all have some great programs IPL provides. We would go out in the community and talk to folks. They had never heard of some of them. We would come back to IPL and say, well, why don't you have a rebate program, or why don't you have this? Well, we do that. It's like your folks don't know it. The other thing about programs is when you design them, you typically have a goal in mind and a metric. And you want to know whether those programs are achieving those metrics. I don't know that exists today, because what it does is it helps you understand, 1, are they achieving the objectives and is the money well spent? And 2, should they change the programs? For example, your IRAP and iSafe programs are huge. They are subscribed to the fullest. That tells me 2 things. 1, the communication is good, but 2, is that program big enough? And what was the original goal? Is it to allow people to pay the bills and reduce your bad debt expense? What is the objective, and is it achieving that? So those are some things. But in addition, there are some standard programs out there that would be a huge benefit to your community. The most important thing to help people manage their electric bill is giving them control over the decision-making around how and when they use electricity. The tools are not there today, so having the programs wouldn't make a difference. But if you had the tools people could take control, and it allows for some rate making that is geared towards people's different needs. It gives you a lot of flexibility. Better services, 24-hour, 24/7 basically, ability to reach someone at the utility. Commercial solar rebates, key accounts, the liaison between the business community and the utility. There's just a lot of things that should be looked at that are kind of standard practices these days, and improved ease of doing business with IPL. Green power is a priority, more tools to serve customers and allow them to pay those apps. Having an app where everybody, and I'm kind of old for this. I didn't grow up with apps. My kids don't do anything unless it can be done from their phone. That's how the population is, and they want to be able to connect to service, pay their bills, make inquiries, everything from their phone, and that's an app. Lastly, and this is the big one, advanced metering infrastructure. All of the things that everybody said they wanted really depend on some fundamental work, and AMI is part of that. I'm not even going to talk about this one because it's a repeat of what I just said, but it's just kind of what we learned and what that translates into. But one thing I want to talk about is, and this last slide probably hits the highest points of what we learned, there is a need to address the future of your power supply today. You are at risk. If you have any growth or want to attract a large customer, if you don't address that, you're going to have some real problems. AMI, it limits your ability to know when and how customers use their power. They have a meter that just tells you how many kilowatt hours are consumed. Doesn't tell you what time of day, what areas consume more than others, any of that. It is really, it limits your ability to provide things that customers want. And AMI, and it's not talked about much, it creates huge efficiencies for the operating crews. You roll less trucks out to address problems because you can solve them remotely where possible, or you know exactly where the problem is and you're not going up and down the line trying to figure out what caused the outage. The other thing is you are asking IPL employees to go into people's yards and businesses to turn off the power. That used to not be as dangerous as it is today, but it is a safety issue with people threatening. I have clients, and IPL's had this too, where people come out and greet the crew person with a gun. AMI solves it's not the panacea, but it does address a lot of issues. And again, high staff turnover is a problem. You have a huge wave of retirees. And if you don't have a program in place to replace those, or have people already training, as Don mentioned, an apprentice lineman, that's a 4 to 6 year program. So you should start today and try. It's a little bit expensive at first because you double up on staffing. But what would happen if you didn't have someone there that could fix something? So our conclusion is IPL's initial strategy needs to focus on bringing the utility up to modern standards for a utility its size, and we're calling those foundational strategies. I think in the report you saw foundational and future. Foundational is just getting IPL up to the baseline. And then we have, and that needs to be done before considering implementation of the suggested future strategies. As we say, IPL needs to learn how to walk before it runs. So the vision, and I'm not going to go through all of this because you've heard it, but these are the words that we heard from your community and staff. Again, operate like a business, well-informed public, governing body that understands the needs of the utility and the community. Business decisions are based on data. Best reliability, economic development, that came up a lot. Wanting to work for IPL, modern technology, that was a big one. And the ability to add or replace resources in a cost-effective way. So that drives us to the strategies. And again, there are 4 big ones: financial, customer, power supply, and operations. Excuse me. Before we do that real quickly, I do want to point out, we did ask everybody what's working and what's not. And these are what's working. Excellent reliability. I mean, so many utilities struggle with that. So that's a big plus. Customer services, we heard a story from a developer, and he says he hasn't experienced this with any other utility they've worked with, and they work with utilities all over the country, that the crews that helped them and the construction of their site were the most responsive and helpful of anywhere they've ever been. That's big. There are multiple payment options that people, which makes it easier for people to pay their bills. There could be more, but I know your folks are working so hard to create that. Your low-income assistance is great by the level of participation. Just need to probably look at what can be done different, better, or more. Employees, you've got dedicated and resourceful employees. They're making do with what they've got, and it's pretty impressive. I've already talked about what needs to improve. We don't even need to go through that slide. So under the financial strategy, it's really the basics, and this is going to be for everything we talk about. It's going to be technology and needing updated and integrated technology. It's going to be staff resources that can actually work with the data and do the analytics. Data analytics is a huge professional track in this world today. There's not a company that doesn't have a job description that says data analyst, because it covers so many things. That's what's needed here. Good financial data. And I think I already mentioned the technology, and people, obviously. Everything we talk about, that will be the central theme. So, something as simple as when you have established budgets, are the budgets tied to goals? And how are they monitored? And how do managers get information to be able to address when things aren't going right? Or how will they know when things are working? Financial forecasts. Sadly, and this isn't Joe's fault, but he was the person that used to keep up the financial forecast. When he got a different job, that isn't happening because he doesn't have someone else. And you can't make decisions about your rates in the future of how you're going to spend money if your forecast is not up to date. Gets to the issue of timely reporting. When you make rate decisions, it's not just about the cost of service. You have a lot of other things that have to be taken into consideration. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but maintaining your reserve fund levels, your debt service coverage, bond ratings, and ability to fund your strategic initiatives. Those all need to be considered as you look at your financial future. A bad bond rating, or missing your debt service coverage, or not maintaining adequate reserves, and you have a weather crisis and don't have the funds to respond, that's not a good place to be. And then again, I mentioned streamlining the processes. The foundational strategies all align with what I just talked about. Updating studies, current cost information, simplifying and modernizing rate design, providing customers with rate strategies so that they know how and when to use power efficiently. One of the things with your rates that we found is that your commercial and industrial customers subsidize your residential, which is why the rates are higher and which doesn't keep you all competitive when you're trying to recruit new business. So looking at that rate design and the equity of it. Talking about green power, you all have a lot of green power whether you know it or not. The SPP market, 40% of the energy from that market is renewable, and it's growing. Your strategic economic development rider, the one you have today is not competitive with your neighbors. And the criteria is not what most entities look for today. When you're looking at giving someone an economic development incentive rate, you want to make sure they're either bringing jobs, money, something of value, increasing the tax base to your community. And that should be some of the things that you basically put into your economic development rates. Now, this is where you get into some strategy. Currently, IPL funds all of their capital improvements except for power plants by paying out of current revenues. While that's great in managing your personal budget, that is not great if you're a utility. What you've done is you've asked current ratepayers to fund future ratepayers' benefits. And that's why utilities are so heavily leveraged, because they're trying to spread the cost of those 20, 30, 40-year investments across all ratepayers. And so one of the things that strategically you might want to consider, and it would do two things. One, it would bring some cost equity. The other is it would give the utility some financial room to invest in some of these strategic areas, is fund just 50% of your capital program with debt. That would buy a margin that could make a big impact. We already talked about pursuing outside funding sources, and again, leveraging your utility for economic development. Rate design, this is stuff that probably can't be implemented until after AMI, or at least until you've got better, more granular financial data. I talked about staffing needs. You know, you need financial analysts, technology, folks that can support and upgrade your systems, and then rate design expertise. You have a great rate design person, but if he gets hit by a truck, there's a problem. He knows everything, and he is good, but he needs help, especially as things get more complex. Customer strategy, we've talked about this, the communication and the extension of services. Something key in that, I mentioned key accounts. A standard practice for utilities is having a designated person or persons that their sole responsibility is to have a relationship with your large customers. They check in on them on a regular basis and say, hey, how are you doing? Are things working? Do you have any issues? What can we do better? Conversely, when things are going to be a problem, like an outage needs to be called, they are the first ones who notify their those big customers that that's going to happen. So it is an important relationship. I talk about a unified value system, and I think I mentioned it in the board. It's where there is a consensus on how people will behave and how you do your work. And accountability, transparency, teamwork, community engagement, honesty. Those are what we call a value system, and you will see those from the board level on down, and that's basically sets the model of how people do their business. And it's not saying that's not there in some form or fashion, but having those stated and having some culture education and training will enhance the customer experience and relationship. Talked about communication extending service offerings to allow customers have control over their decisions, and economic development. Technology enabling customer tools. I'm going to give you all two examples that we heard about. One was the utility has an outage management system, and if you call the outage management number, it will identify the location of where the work needs to be done based on the phone number. That's good if that phone number is correct. If it's not, that means there's got to be a lot of research and clarification and time spent trying to figure out where the outage or the problem is. AMI, again, would help that. The other thing that happens, which I didn't realize until someone explained it to me, is if someone calls customer service and says, hey, I have an outage, well, customer service will call the outage management system, and the number that appears is the customer service number. So you don't have a location at all on where to go. And there's a whole nother process, double entry, and a lot of things that have to happen to get those crews to the right place. That is I don't want to say it's simple, but you've got some good systems. They need to be integrated and adjusted and practices put in place. The other thing, and I hate to say this, but I had to laugh when I heard it. You have some customers that have multiple meters, like a lot of meters. And they asked if they could get a consolidated bill. One bill that just has all their meters, and they pay one bill a month. Can't happen. The system is not able to consolidate all the meters under one name. So this customer makes one payment for every single meter. Simple things, just simple things that take away the irritations. I've already talked about this other stuff. Once you have the basics in place, there's so much you can expand on, and I've talked about how you use technology and really provide some new tools that help customers and the employees. I'm not going to go through these because I've already talked about them. Key here, resource requirements, key account managers, professional marketing and outreach, a communications team that's dedicated to IPL. Having an IPL-based HR professional that really can help develop and train on culture. Culture is what makes their customer service work, and it impacts how the employees treat each other. Customer program evaluation, and the ability to monitor those programs and adjust as needed, and then technology support. Power supply, we were asked to look at three things. One was, what would it look like if IPL owned 100% of all of their power resources? The second was, what if IPL was just a transmission and distribution utility and owned no generation? And the third is a hybrid, which is what operates today. I'll just start off by saying, if you want to go to either of those extremes, it'll be 2049 because of the contracts and the way things are structured today. So, and I'll talk briefly about the pros and cons. Today you have adequate resources, but you're going to need new resources by 2028. If anything, right now you can meet your reserve requirements, but if you got load growth or a customer that needed more than 10 to 13 megawatts, you have a problem. As you heard Don mention, the capacity market's limited, and it takes 4 to 6 years to build a new power plant. These aren't easy, quick decisions. A foundational strategy, quite honestly, is have an integrated resource plan. And what an integrated resource plan is, it looks at your load, the segments of your load, like industrial, residential, commercial, et cetera. How are they growing? How are they developing? What are they planning for the future? Looks at pricing long term. It looks like at the types of generation out there. It really gets into a whole integrated look that can drive that decision making. And it helps the utility and the public understand the decisions that have to be made when. There are benefits to owning 100% of your power supply, and that you control it, it's there. And if you have excess, you can sell it and make money, as Don mentioned, $5 million last year. The drawbacks, as you heard also, the huge capital investment and O&M investment and staffing. The training on new technology. Plants are different than what they used to be. The risk is, and it's pretty high, is the cost and potential obsolescence, depending on what you. It is a gamble trying to figure out what technology is going to be there for 20 years. Purchase power, 100%. Benefits is that you reduce the risk of owning and operating. The drawbacks are you have to have a pretty complex system and trading desk in place that can make sure that they are keeping up on what's happening in the market and buying the power you need when you need it. It's very expensive and requires some very highly trained technical folks to do this. It's not where you get someone on the phone that just makes a phone call and says, hey, I need, 100 megawatts today or this amount of energy, which is how it used to work. It's not like that anymore. That's a market. The risk there is that the market can be good and the market can be bad, but you're at the mercy of the market. When prices are low, it's great. When prices are high and you have no hedge, like your own generation to help offset those high prices, you are fully exposed. So, you know the benefits of the diverse portfolio. I mean, you heard it from Don. It's a mix, and this is what most utilities, unless you are small and you can afford to build your own power, they look at what is the mix of resources and having diversity and how you do that, so that they can really hedge their risk and manage the financial aspects of their business. It's all complicated, though. None of it's easy. Renewable energy, again, you've got 40% that you get in energy, but you can increase that by investing in things like demand response, energy efficiency, distributed energy. If you have people that have solar on the rooftop, solar rebates for your commercial customers, all of those help reduce bills and reduce the demand and need for new resources. Demand response, but you can't do this without AMI, you can have a program where when, like today, when the peak in the system got so high, there was a risk of maybe not having enough power, you can have a program where you have customers agree to be paid to turn off their electricity for a couple of hours. And you can do it remotely, or lower their, turn it off, lower their thermostats a couple of degrees. It's really common where I come from because you can't react fast enough without doing some of those things, and it saves everybody money. And future strategy, we talked about the risk of the coal plants. And we talked about a little bit about prepayment. I would look at the possibility, and it's mainly when interest rates probably drop a little bit, but negotiating a prepayment option where maybe everybody likes their money up front. If there's a way to perhaps sell some debt at a low price, put it in an escrow, and pay off some of your capacity payments early, and the net is that it saves enough money that you can begin to invest in other things. Again, you need to talk to your financial advisor, but there are some techniques out there that might be worth pursuing, and it mitigates that risk of being stuck with a bunch of debt if the plant gets closed. Another option is just joining with other municipal organizations to look at how you can share costs for future resources. Operations, not a lot to say there other than it's good, needs better technology. Your reliability, your folks are doing what they need to do. And again, we talked about AMI. In the future, though, the things that really pose a risk to your operations, cybersecurity, huge. This is what keeps most utility executives up at night, quite honestly. Resilience, how IPL can recover from significant events, because they're going to happen, but how they recover and help the community recover. Safety, and it's not just safety of the workers, it's safety of the community, how the community is protected from the risk of electrical contact. And again, hiring retention, we've talked about that. We also talked about the fact, AMI is out there, maybe getting some loans or government subsidies that could help finance that. We proposed a capital replacement program, very similar to what y'all's, but our engineering team went and evaluated the age and what needed to be put in place to continue that level of reliability, some transformer additions that might need to be put in place as spares or whatever, and that's incorporated in the plan we ran the finances on, and training. So the financial impact, we took IPL's base financial model and updated for actuals. We put in a 50% debt-funded capital program. We kept the the PPA payments, debt service coverage. We maintained the required amount, as well as the reserves. And basically, if you don't have anything significant that changes, if you don't have any growth, status quo, you won't need to increase rates until 2028. You have a very financially healthy utility right now. But we had to create a lot of those numbers, and so I would suggest maybe other folks that are financial experts, perhaps you have a financial model that can track that on a regular basis. That could change at any moment. Again, if you had to make a significant investment to help support a new customer, things change in the financial markets. There's a lot of things that could impact that, but right now, things look good, which is a good time to make a decision about your future resources. We did not incorporate new generation or resources in the model because we have no idea what kind of resources, when, or where. And so you'll see where you've got some room to look at that. And when you're looking at that, integrate an integrated resource plan with your financial planning. Those two have to go hand in hand. And with that, I know it was a lot of information. I tried to cut it short, but it still was a lot. I'll take questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
So I was at your presentation to PUAB, and you say if nothing changes, we don't have to change rates till 2028. However, in order for us to make the investments we need in staff, future training, cybersecurity, AMI, and future generation, we're going to have to make some decisions about investments because there's some substantial investments that we need to make to keep us reliable and future thinking.
And really quick, just to clarify, we built that in to that. We built in AMI and staffing into our forecast. It says you could, if you change your debt financing structure to the 50-50, and with some of the growth that you have, you could possibly go until 2028 with the beginning, because AMI is a long process, so it wouldn't be like a lump sum all at once. AMI, your infrastructure investments, because that's already in the plan, we just changed it around a little bit, and the staffing. So you could potentially, if you didn't have anything out of the ordinary, if you didn't have a lot of growth, say, or a failure of a unit, 2028 would be when you would need a rate increase potentially.
And when you presented, you said then rate increases between 3 to 7%.
Yeah, between 2 and 3, and a couple of years is 7%.
So just trying to think about predictability for our clients,
Yeah.
phasing that in more slowly allows them to adjust their budgets. A 7% rate increase in a couple of years would be devastating for our citizens. So I hope we will be looking at a more measured increase so that we can accumulate the funds that we need to make the investments that we do. Because I know Joe would appreciate having extra generation tomorrow, but things don't happen that quickly.
Right.
Thank
And you are on the right track. That's when you do integrated resource planning and you combine that with your financial planning, that's what utilities best practices are. You start looking to the future and how can you avoid the rate spikes and build up your cash reserves to address that. So you're right on point.
Anyone else? Please proceed.
Appreciate the depth of your information. It's a little overwhelming in some ways, but
Sorry.
at the same time, I get why it was and why it is, and so I appreciate that. A few questions, and then I'll probably hold some other ones for maybe the meeting with the mayor. But you talk a lot about need for data and additional analysis tools and data-driven decisions in that. And specifically, at one point you stated, it takes a great deal of effort to reconcile conflicting sources of information to understand IPL's financial position. Can you speak a little more to that and help me understand, what kind of conflicts you're seeing there?
Well, and it really, again, it's not anybody's fault, but we would do data requests for financial information. And we would get some financial information, like from the CAFR, which is the annual financial report. And then we would ask for some breakdown or lower level or, additional information, and it wouldn't reconcile. And so we'd have to figure out what was the difference and what was driving it. And unless you got the right person, that could be a process. And there was a lot of turnover during our work. And it's not, people tried to help us the best they could, but the people that knew the information weren't necessarily there.
Okay, that's helpful. You kind of quoted from the city charter on economic development, and I'm just wondering, and I'll piggyback on what Councilman Perkins was talking about relative to economic development and that side of it. You know, I kind of gathered that you were saying that the charter has been interpreted a little bit more tightly than what we need to interpret. Would that be your assessment?
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so this is my personal opinion.
Okay.
Don't hold me to it, because it can be interpreted. But as I read it, it talks about not using IPL funds for things that were not, in essence, part of IPL operations. Well, IPL operations could include rate structure, infrastructure investment, how you handle the property owned by IPL. So if you take a broad interpretation, there's a lot of stuff that falls into the operations of the utility, especially if you consider it a city department.
Okay, all right. I kind of thought that's what you were saying, but I just wanted to make sure I got that. You talked in there that you gave, in fact, in Appendix D, you gave us a good report on the hiring a variety of more people and kinds of salaries we need to look at paying and things of that nature. That's really helpful. I guess my one question on that is, because I don't know how quick we can do all that, is that in a list of priority from your, I mean, I couldn't figure out what order it was listed in, and so I wondered if it was in a list of priority in terms of what you were hoping for.
It probably was listed in the order of which we presented the area in the strategic plan.
Okay.
So the priority would be set by you all,
Okay.
what things to address and how to address them.
Okay, all right, good. Let's see. So in your long-term capital plan, it spoke about significantly to OH and movement from overhead to underground, but I didn't see a lot of that in your discussion, and so I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit more about that and what needs to be done to improve what we're currently doing?
I think you've got a plan right now where I think the new stuff you're trying to put underground, it's just really whether you want to accelerate that. And the benefit is, you mitigate your outages that are related to trees and weather. I don't think we recommended accelerating. I think we just said keep on your current
Okay.
path, because you're doing a little bit each year, and it really just depends on reliability issues that you encounter in segments of the city, whether you should do anything different.
Okay, great. Last question I'll ask is, in your recommendations, you talk about streamlining administrative processes, including procurement. Speak a little more about that, if you would, and help me understand kind of what you're getting at.
I've worked for a city, and I understand this problem very well. Cities have specific procurement guidelines and processes that are not always efficient. They're government entities, and so things are designed the way they are designed. And an organization that needs to run like a business or react fairly quickly, it's hard to get things done. For example, you have a critical piece of infrastructure, like you need a new transformer. You go out for bid, and the bidders say, okay, this price is good for 60 days. Transformers are hard to get. You cannot get a decision on whether you can purchase that going through the process in enough time to respond to that vendor. So looking at that, looking at things like delegation of authority, and those are driven, by policy and ordinances. I know y'all just raised it. It was really low, quite honestly. And it's a hard concept when you think about, you want to be accountable to the citizens for the money that's being spent versus balancing what has to be the decisions and operations of moving quickly, especially in emergencies. In the utility I worked at, we we did a full assessment on delegation of authority. And really, the smallest thing you could buy was $10,000. And so you are asking for everything to go for approval to our board for $10,000. That list was like this. So it's really just kind of what makes sense. Do you trust your managers to make good decisions, and what checks and balances do you need to have in there? So that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Okay, great, thank you. Any more questions?
Anyone else? Please proceed.
Thank you for standing there for over an hour and
That's
talking
all
to
right.
us. I have an AMI question, and I know there's a lot that goes into it, but is there a general timeline for a city our size, like how long the installation would take?
I think we laid out a plan in the report that said about 5 years. And that's because you have to scope it out, you have to figure out what your priorities are, take bids for the equipment, you need to have project management. So I think it was about a 3 to 5 year timeline.
Anyone else? Go ahead, please.
With regards to AMI, some of the concerns that was raised in the past, I have no doubt the information, having that new technology would give us the data reliability, and also for the customer, the information to be able to use remotely for themselves. But a couple of the major concerns that were brought, and for me too, is if I have one of those meters, I really don't want anybody from IPL adjusting my thermostat. Thank you, I'll take care of that. But I understand that at times there's been parts of the country who have those implementations there that adjustment is already, or those adjustments can be made to lower or to raise to reduce the energy being brought to that home. So with that said, is there usually policies that can be put in play that would not give
Typically,
the power?
yeah. To your question, typically that never happens without the customer's consent.
Okay.
I have it because I understand how our grid works. And if my utility feels like they need to lower or raise my thermostat 2 to 5 degrees, I'd rather have that than a brownout. So
Sure.
I have no problem. But a lot of people do, to your point. And so that's a choice. And your large industrial customers, a lot of what utilities do say, okay, we'll pay you a premium or discount your rates if you will, because manufacturing consumes a lot. So that's how, but to your specific question, that is an opt-in. You have to agree to that.
And to carry on with that, we had brownouts a couple winters ago when everything was kind of a mess up here. I didn't mind that. I thought we did a very good job as a city, letting folks know what sector was going to go next for 30 minutes, I believe was what we had it. So I think that was okay. I mean, I don't work from home, so as much, so it didn't affect me. But those are some of the conversations that was kind of holding up the progress last time. The other question
Well, I will
had-
say your utility managed their brownouts much better than the ones in Texas.
So I saw on the news. I think that was it for that. Procurement. Do you feel that we need to have a specific procurement policy for IPL that's separate from our general fund city?
I've seen it both ways. It depends on what your approval levels are and how much has to come to council. And so I would look at that, and if that means that you have a lot of stuff coming to council for approval, or there are critical things that don't get approved, then you might want to have some exceptions or separate policy. You don't have to have a completely separate policy. You might just have some exceptions in delegation authority.
Sure. Right now, we upped city manager's approval to $100,000 without coming to the council authority. And I always like to make the fun comparison. Kansas City's like $1.5 million, so try to get him there, but a little
Well,
bit at a time.
truth be told, I had $1 million in authority at my utility.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, well, we're
Sure.
making $1 million decisions every day.
No, I understand
Yeah.
when discussions are had in the public. I mean, we
Yeah.
you don't touch anything under hardly $1 million out there
Right.
in IPL, so
Right.
fully understood.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Other further discussions, questions? Please proceed. Go ahead.
Comments, but not
Okay.
related to this, so.
Yep.
You want me to go ahead with that?
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. Well, you know, as, for the council, as liaison from the council to the PUAB, I attended the PUAB meeting where DKMT presented similar to what they did this evening. Really helpful. I think it's important for us to remember back what got us here. Roughly a year ago, we started discussions regarding the future of IPL. That was a different council, and there were discussions among that council that to best determine the future of IPL, we needed to obtain these reports. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'll start over for you. I think it's important to remember what got us here. Roughly a year ago, we started discussions regarding the future of IPL. That was a different council at that time, and there were discussions among that council that to best determine the future of IPL, we should obtain these reports and the findings that we just heard, and then take this to the voters by November of 2025 for a decision as to how we would move forward. At the PUAB meeting about 10 days ago, that group made a motion to recommend to the council that we rescind that council item requesting the November 2025 vote. That evening, following the presentation to the PUAB meeting, I asked the city manager to prepare a resolution to rescind that requirement and to send the decision to the voters. And so he's been working on that. Since the PUAB meeting, I've had a chance to read these reports in the white paper provided by DKMT. In addition, over the past several months, I've had discussions with a number of residents expressing concerns about taking this item to the voters. So at this point, as this council's liaison to the PUAB, in agreement with what Councilmember Stewart mentioned earlier, I'm suggesting that this council take action to rescind the prior council action in an effort to put this to rest for our community. And here are my reasons for doing so. Cost-benefit analysis does not present a scenario, in my opinion, where the sale of the utility is either practical or significantly economically beneficial to the city in looking at that. Number two, I believe the study we've heard tonight indicates the best course of action for IPL is to take actions to move our utility forward as a municipally owned utility and find better ways to utilize the utility to benefit our community, most especially for economic development in that perspective. It's clear we need to take a number of actions as a council to move IPL forward to make it the kind of utility we want it to be. There are a number of recommendations presented in the presentations that DKMT has made that need to be addressed quickly and in an effort to keep IPL the quality entity that we want it to be. And I think we need to instruct the city manager to take action to move in that direction. And lastly, and probably most importantly, we need to put this to rest for the benefit of IPL staff and management so that they can feel security in their roles and know that we as a council are fully supportive of moving IPL forward in a positive light. Our council rules suggest that this would need to be brought forward to a study session before going on the council agenda unless 4 of us agree to take it directly to the agenda. I'm not sure how the rest of the council feels about this. It certainly warrants further discussion at a study session, in my opinion, but I also believe it's in our best interest to rescind the prior action as quickly as possible. We can do both if we like by agreeing to discuss this at September 9th study session and then put it on the agenda on September 16th. But that's up to the council to take 4 people to do that. Regardless, I feel it's critical to move forward to work on this rescission and then work on a number of the recommendations presented this evening and in the coming months. So that's my report back as your liaison.
Thank you. Anyone else? Other comments, questions, concerns?
Mayor.
Please proceed.
So I spent considerable time with the report. Can I ask the city manager, are the white papers available for the public?
Yes, if the public accesses the city website, pulls up the study session for tonight, the presentations as well as the white papers are included as attachments to tonight's agenda.
Great, thank you. I also agree that the conclusion is clear, asked and answered. I agree with Councilmember Fears. I just want to add that the white papers are so important and so interesting and explain so much behind IPL that really weren't shown tonight. I mean, explaining SPP and how that works. And for me, that was really important, and I'm so glad I was able to learn that. I really hope that the residents take the time to spend the time with the study. I think it's really worth everyone's time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Other comments? Please
Mr. Mayor,
proceed.
I'm going to encourage us to consider Councilmember Fear's suggestion to expedite the consideration of that motion. Thank you.
Anyone else? Other comments, questions, concerns? Okay, and then we've got one item for Madam City Clerk, and so do we need to make that announcement there? Okay.
Do you need Mr. Mayor, do you need a motion to move that item directly to the agenda for 4 of us to, I know we don't usually do business in our study session, so I don't know the most appropriate way to handle that.
As I understand it now, and I could be wrong, I'm happy to be corrected. We don't take votes here. I'm happy to change that rule and address it, but I would see it just this way. Ask 4 of your colleagues if you have it, then boom, we can expedite
Well, I think
it.
we have 4, by what I've heard discussion just tonight. I mean, Councilman Stewart, Councilmember McCandless, Councilmember Wiley, and myself,
Okay.
and others haven't yet commented, so.
Yep, no objections. I'm fine with that. But, you know, to make a formal vote, we'd have to change our rules because we just don't take votes at this body. Please proceed.
To our counselor, are we able to take that type of formal action here to present forward to the
Sure, I
full
believe
body?
you can take a vote to move it to a regular session.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if that's the case, I'd make that motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Fears?
Yes.
Councilmember Perkins?
Yes.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember McCandless?
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley?
Yes.
Councilmember Vought?
Yes.
Mayor Rowland?
Yes. And we have unanimous 7 in favor, 0 opposed. And so, Mr. City Manager, if you can put that on the September 9th agenda, that would be great.
Yes, sir, we'll be glad to do it.
Thank you. Any further discussions? Please proceed.
Just, I want to be sure that you asked for time to visit with them to ask a whole bunch of additional questions. If there's the possibility that a summary could be made of those discussions, just so that we make sure that people continue to see what's being asked. It's an important set of discussions. I want to be sure that that's all available to the public. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean that, I haven't done this, but AI will take the summary of the discussion and in Zoom And so if you don't mind us doing that kind of an approach, we'll have some, I'd take a look at it, make sure it's not, but AI can do that, and I've had clients who've used it and helped it. I've never used it myself, but I think that's a possibility for that. So I think it's a great suggestion. Very, very good. Madam City Clerk, what's next?
A recommendation has been made to reappoint Trevor Tilton and Sean Fight to the Independence Square Advisory Board. Staff requests direction to add a resolution to the next regular meeting for the appointment of these individuals to the above board. And a recommendation has been made to appoint Cody Atkinson to the Board of Adjustment. Staff requests direction to add a resolution to the next regular meeting for the appointment of this individual to the above board.
Anyone else? Other comments, suggestions, concerns? With that, anything else for you, Mr. City Manager?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.